Hey everybody in the 7 Billion Geniuses community. Dr. Joel Glenn Wixon here, and I'm back in the 7 Billion Geniuses recording studio to once again talk about the ideas that I'm very much excited about and connected to, that I have outlined in this book that I wrote called 7 Billion Geniuses, that you can get just by asking. Let me know if you want a copy. There's also all kinds of stuff on the internet about 7 Billion Geniuses. On Facebook and Twitter and Tumblr and Blogger and all kinds of stuff. If you just Google my name, Joel Glenn Wixon, you can get to those links and find out these other things I've been writing about in the context of 7 Billion Geniuses. But I'm here today to talk about this tragic epidemic of, there's lots of epidemics, fear and anxiety. But anyway, this one's about the school shootings, and I'm going to take a rather controversial position because I always do. But I think that, the primary struggle that we have right now in the context of these issues, this specific event, and this tragic loss of life has to do with the fact that we never ask the right questions. We are so obsessed with the idea of making these things stop that we don't really work in a way that's going to ever create that outcome. And we do it with everything generally in our culture. We want to talk about assault rifles, and it's a great thing to talk about. However, whether it's assault rifles or shotguns or pistols or wrist rockets or rocks or whatever it happens to be, there's always going to be a way to kill people. Obviously, you can kill a lot more people with an assault rifle a lot more quickly. And I don't want to get distracted by that conversation because it's a perfectly legitimate conversation to have. However, it ultimately doesn't get us going in the right direction, causes division, gets us talking about the Second Amendment, which is a complete distraction from what's actually going on. Again, back to questions. We talk a lot about questions here in the 7 Billion Geniuses studio, and I talk a lot about questions in my life because I think it's a particularly profound area that's often missed and not attended to, because we think we ask questions all the time, but in fact, a lot of times we ask questions that are statements masked as questions, and instead of actually genuinely asking a question that's rooted in curiosity. And but in most instances, in this sort of situation, the first question we ask is, why did this happen? And then we start looking at social media feeds and talking to people who knew the person and getting information about how they were perceived, unfortunately, in retrospect. And how, well, geez, and then unfortunately that leads to this notion of creating some kind of profile about self-esteem, high-low self-esteem, self-worth, aggression, blah, 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 that's supposed to create a profile that we can then send out into the universe. And if anybody meets that profile, then somehow we're going to be able to figure out who's going to do the next shooting, and then we'll be able to stop it. And how well has that worked? It hasn't worked at all, because it doesn't work, because it's ultimately the wrong question. The question is not, how could this happen? Unfortunately, we live in a culture that very, very much facilitates this happening, obviously, because it keeps happening. The more important question, I believe, is to ask specifically to the person what purpose was behind their actions. Now, that's an extraordinarily controversial position, I believe, because we're going to come up with how could that purpose be in any way useful? It obviously has something to do with hate and aggression and anger and blah, blah, blah. Well, it is important, because every single person who's done this has been different and unique, and the idea that we're trying to make them into one person to somehow come up with some fix so it won't happen anymore is what we always do, and it never works. The fact is there are specific reasons why this person did what they did that will be gleaned from them by questions that will not be asked to this person. Perhaps there may be somebody who thinks along the same lines as I do and other people in the context of narrative therapy do, who may in fact ask these questions, but it's more likely that they won't ask these questions, because they will, and I'm going to get controversial again, those questions, ultimately these kinds of questions will lead to a purpose, a position behind these actions that is not about craziness, that's not about rampant anger, that's not about unfulfilled who knows what, psychosis and who knows what, these sorts of notions that we generally get to. Although the kinds of stresses that the person's under right now may in fact put them in a position where what they would say would seem like what might otherwise be described as psychotic. But it's a larger context. The kinds of questions that we would ask that would get to this purpose and generally will not be asked, because the next question after we come to this purpose is this: How is it that this person came to a position to believe that the only way that they could enact this purpose was to do what they did? That is where we get to the solution. Because when we start to answer that question, then you can come up with alternative responses to whatever position they're in. Responses that don't include killing other people. I'll also go as far to say that if this person thought that if this was the first time this person tried to stand up for whatever position they take up in the context of the answers to that first set of questions, they would have done this a long time ago. This would have been the first response. In fact, generally, this is oftentimes the last response. There are probably a number of non-lethal responses that they tried before. In fact, some of those social media posts may have been those responses. So the idea that this is people's first go-to action in the context of what they stand for is, well, I don't believe that it's true. And I will stand up and say that I don't believe that this is the first attempt they've made to try to take a stand for this position. So again, to be clear, the questions need to be asked about the position that this action was an attempt to stand up for. And questions that don't just, this is not one question, this is a series of questions that is asked over time from a position of genuine curiosity. And once a position, once a stand, once something that a person holds dear starts to be illuminated, then we can start to ask the question of how it became to be that this action was the way that they thought they were going to stand up for that position. Now I'll tell you something else. The third component of all this is that those things rarely go together. The best way for any person in a position to take such an intense act, the idea that the best way to stand up for that position was an act of violence, is rarely something that is consistent with the intentions of that person after asking this series of questions. And so that creates a substantial amount of hope, because ultimately there are ways for people to stand up for those things that they hold dear, obviously, because millions and millions of billions of people do this every day without using an assault rifle. So having said all that, I'm going to return to my own position of acknowledging the tremendous pain and suffering that we go through as a country every single time one of these things happens, and I'm going to share a song to kind of join with that pain and to talk about a little bit about belief. This song's called "Believe," and it talks about how there certainly have been many times in my life when the circumstances of my life have separated me from knowing what to believe and knowing what to have faith in, and yet ultimately the thing that returns me to a position of hope and faith is the people around me, and the love that I have for those people. So the song's called "Believe." When I don't know what to believe, and I can't see what to believe, and I can't hear the music, something's come and taken that from me, yeah, yeah. And I don't know what to believe, and I can't see what to believe, and I can't see the forest, something's come, burn down all the trees, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I don't know what makes me whole. It's like a cabin in my soul. when I hear you laugh and the chains that bind me start to lose control, yeah, yeah. Like a wave washing over me, like the tides come to set me free. Your divine intervention and your sweet mind of pure intention raining down just like it's supposed to be. And then I know what I believe. I can see what I believe. And I can hear the music takes away pain that's blinding me, yeah, yeah. And I can see what makes me whole. And I know what I believe. And I can see the forest one communion rising up to pray, yeah, yeah. It's like a wave washing over me, like the tide come to set me free, yeah, yeah. Your divine intervention and your sweet wine of pure intention raining down just like it's supposed to be. Then I know what I believe. I can see what I believe. And I know what I believe. I can see what I believe. And I know what I believe. And I can see what I believe. That's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate all your support. Thanks for letting me rant. Check out the contact information at the end of the video. If you have anything to respond, I'd be happy to hear it. If you want to further this conversation, I'd be happy to do that as well. Just contact me, contact information, emails,